Happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to AIGA Atlanta's September Insider webinar. We have a great talk for you today. I'm Sam Zelifro, and I'm hosting alongside Matt Rogers. Both of us are from the in-house committee of our Atlanta chapter, and we have Mario Soley from Truist with us today. I'm so excited to introduce you to him. He has great energy and great experience, and so I think you're going to get a lot out of our conversation today. Mario is currently an experienced senior designer at Truist, where he's focused on designing the future vision of the mobile app. In his past roles, he has been a part of building design teams and leading design facilitation workshops. He also has experience being a part of design system teams within complex enterprise companies. Mario is a strategic and innovative thinker with a passion for solving problems through human-centered design methodologies. He believes people are the vehicle that drives discovering and creating solutions for the world's greatest challenges. He enjoys bringing diverse groups of people together for a common cause, bringing value into the world. So before we have Mario turn on his camera and we bring him into the mix, as always, we want to thank our Atlanta AIGA in-house committee. So Matt, if you go to the slide with our team, we got some faces and names for you to see. Lucas is our chair, so if you're interested in getting involved or have any suggestions or thoughts, he's the guy you want to reach out to. I'm Sam Zelifro, and we've got Meg, Courtney, and Matt on the team as well. So thanks, guys, for your love and support. And we'll go ahead and hand it over to Amy Mangan from Robert Half. She's got our Market Minute update.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, so here we are in September already. Amy Mangan with the Robert Half Marketing and Creative Market Minute. So some cool stuff going on in Atlanta. If we slide on over, thank you. So we touched on Deluxe Corp probably about this time last year, where we heard they were going to be coming to Atlanta. Well, they're here now, and they've opened their office in Sandy Springs. And I was just looking at their careers page, and there are tons of open positions in all lines of business, but also marketing and creative roles there. So if you're looking for a position, you may want to check them out. They're sort of like an ADP type of company for small business. So pretty cool what they do. And then also new to Atlanta, Tosca Musk, who is Elon's sister, will be relocating her production company / streaming service from LA to Atlanta. So that hasn't happened yet, but it will be happening. And she cited our awesome talent pool for the reason that they're doing that. I'm sure those tax breaks help too. Okay, so on to the next slide. We have some newer data that I wanted to share with you. This is always about a month or two delayed for when it comes out from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. But basically, the numbers you need to know are there are 10.1 million open jobs in the US right now. I expect that number to go up even in the next report that comes out in a few days. That number was up from 9.2 in May, so that's huge. And then the quit rate is the highest that it's ever been. So that essentially means people proactively quitting jobs. It's up to 2.7%. And then just to put that into context, is almost 4 million workers quitting their jobs in the month of June. That's crazy. And then that professional business sector, the quit rate went up as well. So that's all of our industry. And then in the month of June, 6.7 million people were hired. And we're continuing to see that change and all of those updates through our LinkedIn feeds and getting updates from our clients and just lots of movement in the market. So we'll be curious to see how long that trend continues. And then on the next slide, we've been talking about hybrid work for, 12 months at least now. And we have a new survey where 71% of hiring managers say that once the pandemic is completely over and all the stay-at-home orders and restrictions have lifted, that they expect to have their teams on site full-time 5 days a week. 71%. That's a pretty alarming number. However, conversely, only 25% of employees that we surveyed say that they want to be on site full time. About half say that they prefer a hybrid of remote and in office. And that does not narrow down to whether it's 1 day on site or 4 days on site. So I'm sure that there's many who would prefer more like 1 or 2. And so it'll be interesting to see how these statistics play out in real time over the coming months, with over 10 million jobs open and employees really being in the catbird seat to determine what jobs will or will not work for them, and companies kind of hoping to have on-site work full time. It's going to be interesting to see how that all shakes out in the long run. So hopefully companies start to listen to potential employees, or I do think that they're going to risk turnover or having problems attracting top talent. So on the next slide, just want to put a plug in our free resource. The 2022 salary guide will be available September 14th, just in a couple weeks. It is, like I said, a free resource for you. So obviously, it's going to have salary information, but it's also going to have a lot of great intel on hiring, retention, what's going on in the market, benefits, just a lot of great information for you to use either as the hiring manager to make sure that your team is paid equitably and that they're getting the right benefits. But also, if you're potentially looking for a role, it's good to make sure you're not pricing yourself below or above the market standards. So feel free to touch base with me if you'd like to schedule time to review that. My contact info is on the next slide, and I'm always happy to just catch up on LinkedIn. Feel free to shoot me a message. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Sam.
Amy, question for you really fast.
Okay, yeah.
Are you seeing companies build in any incentives to get people back in the office?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Nothing that I could really point to. No.
Okay. Yeah, I'm
It's
kind of
just kind of
curious.
like, because we said so.
Right. Right. Okay. I was just curious to see. Thank you so much.
I'll keep you posted. That's a good
I'm
question.
excited to see how that evolves. Great. Well, I guess it's time to introduce you all to Mario. Mario, you want to turn your camera on? Welcome.
Hey.
Hey. Thank you so much for being with us today.
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the last few weeks as we've been preparing for the webinar.
Yeah.
So let's get started.
Awesome.
Would love for you to kind of share with our audience, what your journey has been, a little bit about your background and how you've gotten to the point you are today, just for the context.
Yeah, sure. So, naturally, I think most creatives they spend a little time as their kids, right, being creative and perhaps growing up in a creative household, right? And so both my parents were from New York, right? And one of the, epic centers for creativity, right? And so my mom's side, she was more of that interior designer, seeking to express herself through fashion, so on and so forth. So a lot of the art side I get from her. And then my dad's side, I get more of the technical aspect of design and some of the design thinking I have today, right? He had a lot of the meticulous aspects of understanding how technical things work. He was in the Air Force, and so he would design these panels in the bombers and have to put them together and assemble them and so on and so forth. And so every time in life when he wanted to kind of teach me a lesson, he would sit me down and draw things to kind of help me understand the lesson, right, that he wanted me to get. And so between the two of them, right, it kind of formalized my way of seeing the world through creativity and ultimately, kind of leading me towards that journey towards becoming a designer. When I was kind of towards the tail end of high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, right? I was like, I could do a bunch of things. I felt like I had a strong connection with film and maybe perhaps I could do that. I also at the time played a lot of video games, right? So I had a huge passion for how video games, one, told stories, but two, kind of walked people through the hero's journey, right? When you played video games, you were almost immersed into this world of understanding how characters move through a given story. And, you would experience this in a way where it kind of take you away from this real life into this alternate reality. And so, ultimately I was at home trying to make up my mind. And I saw this commercial that, kind of called me to say, hey, I think it was a Art Institute commercial about game design, and end up, taking it up and going up there and saying, hey, I may want to design video games for a living. and went to school, and kind of the rest is history, right? Started studying there and loved it, right? And loved the art aspect, with the technical aspect of it. And, that's kind of how I end up getting into design, really.
Yeah. Was there anyone else in your life? I mean, I love hearing about your parents and kind of knowing that they,
Yeah.
exposed you to some of the
Yeah.
creative
Yeah.
things. Anybody else in your life growing up that helped influence you or get you on this design track?
Yeah. So, they were like the huge pillars, right? But after I got out of college, funny enough, I met Amy, and she, at the time, I believe, was a recruiter. And in talking with her, she ended up helping me get my first job at Home Depot, right? At the time, I was working for a small marketing agency, doing some design locally, and it was great. I love my job. But I end up wanting to level up and do something different, and end up getting in contact with Amy. And she was so helpful on segueing me into enterprise design. She knew someone at Home Depot, and really helped me to get into the doors of enterprise design, and getting into a bigger company. So it was great. She definitely had a influence there on getting me connected, right, from a recruiter standpoint.
Yeah, that's fabulous.
Yeah.
So you went to school at Art Institute, yes?
Hmm.
Right. And then right out of school, you started working for a small marketing firm doing design work for them.
That's
And
right.
then you landed at Home Depot with the
Yeah.
assist from Amy. Shout out to her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your time at Home Depot and the type of work that you were doing.
Yeah, so it was great, right? Initially, it was like a lot of marketing campaigns, right? And it was just designing the experience on holidays. How do people buy products, right? And how to help them navigate to, one, locating what they wanted to buy, right, as the customer, but two, helping them to get finished with that journey, right? And helping them to check out. But it was at a massive scale, right? And at the marketing agency, I hadn't yet really understood the power of measuring art, right? And the power of measuring design, right? At the time at the agency, when you design something for somebody, it's just, okay, I'm going to make something look really good, infuse some functionality into it, and then great. But, early in my career, I had this kind of introduction to, hey, how can you measure design? How can you measure art? And what does the business look at when it comes to that, right? How do they say, hey, this web page, right, that is designed in this fashion, how does that equate to a business outcome or success, right? And so that was kind of partly coming on to Home Depot, what I started working on. And then as I progressed in my career, I started to segue into innovation projects and smarter home related projects, and how to connect the dots with selling, Internet of Things products, and how to get those to customers in a way that, one, they can educate themselves on the products they were buying that were considered innovative or technology advancement. But also too, it's how to connect the dots between different channels as well, because web obviously is just one platform, right, that customers would look to buy a product. They also go in the store. And so how do you innovate on how customers can potentially experience a product before they buy it in the store, and creating experiences in the store that they can try out, Internet of Things products, right? How do they try out a camera in store so that helps them want to actually buy the product or understand the value that they may have in buying the product?
Right on. So you spent some time at Home Depot doing these things, and then what was the next step in your
Yeah,
journey?
so the next step, I ended up moving on right into the banking world, right, and started designing there. End up having the opportunity to actually build my first team, which was great, right, and being new to that, right. There's so many things you end up learning along the way for doing that, right? But there was this transition from an introduction to, okay, what does it mean to measure the art of design? And what does it mean to measure design in general, whether it be business outcomes or user outcomes or customer outcomes, to more of that strategic view of what design can be, right? And how do you infuse really sophisticated design processes, right, into design with keeping, these past learnings along the way, such as measuring design, analytics, getting customer feedback, and working with partners to keep the center around people, but it being a conversation of, okay, what's the business outcome we want and what's the customer outcome we want along the way, right? And then, from that time, it started getting into that space of, okay, how do we create products from scratch, right? And what that looks like, and how do we innovate in that way where you may be trying to re-envision how our product is, right? And you have to start from scratch and you have to say, okay, what could this be in 3 to 5 years, right? What type of product can this be? How do we envision that? And, me working on a team where we said, okay, where do we start from that, right? What's in the market, right? What's the bank's goals, right? At where we want to be in this time. And along the way, using collaborative, design processes to get to that end vision, right? Leveraging research, leveraging foresight thinking, leveraging cross-functional partners, right? That extend outside of, the triage of product engineering and design, right? There's so much more contributions. I think when you get to big enterprise, you don't realize that perhaps a sales team or relationship management team has in the design process. And when you bring not only your main stakeholders, right, of product and engineering into the picture to say, hey, like, how can we do this together to re-envision the product? And how do we get you guys drawing and doing what we do to understand the needs of the customer and how we need to get there and formulate ideas? But how do we bring in people who are not familiar with this process, like a team from sales or a customer support rep to also be a part of that process?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit as we were preparing for this, right? And that everyone can be creative, right? So how do you bring all of these different multifunctional partners together to yield like a sum that is greater than its individual parts?
Yes.
And I mean, that's essentially like what design thinking is. So can you talk a little bit about, how you kind of disarm people and enable them to be creative on this multifunctional team to output something that is greater than you can do alone?
Absolutely. So at its core, it's about inclusivity, right? The thing about design sometimes is when you have a group of people who are in a, design exercise, right? To, let's say, if we're doing Crazy 8, which is an exercise where you just really have a time allocated to you. You have a Sharpie and you have a piece of paper that's folded into 8 different sections, right? And the play is in 5 minutes, right? Whoever's sitting at the table, whether you're product, engineering, sales, relationship, you're all going to draw, right? And you're all going to come up with ideas on how to solve this problem, right? That you've all kind of assembled to solve, right? The idea is to instill confidence in anyone that, hey, you can do this, right? What we do is, we're specialized, right? And this is, what we do every day, but it doesn't mean we should be the only ones doing it, right? And it's instilling confidence that, hey, the knowledge that you possess as a sales rep or a relationship manager, I don't have that. So the way that you see a product is different, right? I may have some insight into what it takes to sell a product or to maintain a relationship with a customer, but I won't have that extensive knowledge of perhaps the complaints that come from the customer support, and they have that deeper insight to, hey, at this particular screen or in this particular task, our customers are struggling and they want it to be different, right? So it's really about instilling that confidence, right, in them that, hey, we need what you have in your head as far as the information about our customers. We need that in order for us to design a better product that is, how should I say, multi-perspective. And really, as they come up with ideas, it's celebrating those ideas, right? It's letting them know, like, that's a great idea. And so that's kind of a little bit of what goes into it. It's really making people feel welcome to practice the craft of design, but knowing that their idea is celebrated, because there's really I don't want to say there's no bad idea, but it's really hard to generate a bad idea when you're just really creating.
Right. And in my experience, to your point, like definitely kind of celebrating the different subject matter experts and what they uniquely bring to the table and like their understandings, right? But then also focusing on the consumer and making sure that like it's not about us, it's about the consumer, right? And so if we really are all working in toward that same lighthouse, like that's when great stuff happens. We remove our egos, we remove like our preconceived notions, we leverage our experience, but really work to solve the needs of the consumer. So what we're bringing to market can like make a difference.
Absolutely. I mean, part of, I feel the designer's role in that process of creating something is, one, being a great facilitator, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bringing diverse backgrounds together and connecting all the dots. But at the same time, keeping everybody focused on the why we are here, which is the people we design for, right? It's not necessarily the technology advancement. It's not things that don't have anything to do with people. It's everything centered around people, right? And when we keep that focus and we get a really good understanding on the different people we're designing for, and we all kind of march to the same beat, right? That just really helps with innovating, and it helps with building really good products.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that's a good segue. So, as we talked and I got to know you better, like you have a lot of experience in this innovation, kind of portion, of your career. You've spent a lot of time doing innovation. So what I was hoping is that we could dig a little bit deeper into that. And I would love for you first to define what innovation is for the audience so people know kind of what we're talking about. But I want to know, what does that mean? And at the companies you've worked for, like what has that kind of looked like?
Yeah. So, a lot of how I think about innovation, it's creating something new from something that most people feel is currently tangible, right? And so it's taking something that people are really familiar with and creating a new and unique perspective of whatever it is, right? And so if you have a piece of software, right, that someone is accustomed to using, right, then it's looking at how it exists today and the future of what it could be, right, and creating a new and unique perspective on what that is, right, and solving for that. To me, when I think about innovating, or when I hear the word innovation, that's what I think about. As it relates to and the second question you asked me, it just slipped my mind. What was the second question?
No, it's just more about the context of innovation.
Oh yeah.
On the enterprise level, like what does that mean?
Yeah. So what does
we
it
talk
look
about
like?
that in-house? Yeah.
Yeah. So, a lot of times in my experience, I've been fortunate because all the companies that I've worked for, they've just been really good at innovation, right? And probably further ahead than some smaller companies. And so I've been really privileged to work with a lot of talent. But a lot of times, companies that do innovation well have kind of this separate entity, right? Whether it be an accelerator lab or an innovation lab that is purely focused on innovating products, right? And a lot of times those teams are made up of, partnership of like people who day in, day out implement and design for the product. But then you have like specialists, like foresight thinkers, right? Those who are like trained to kind of look ahead and see kind of where things are going from an environment standpoint, from an industry standpoint, and connect that with the past and the present of where we're at, right? And so a lot of time it's these unique people getting together and kind of forging a path forward to innovate, right? It's one designer thinking about today on, hey, this is the best practice for, let's say, a drop down, or this is the best practice for a form or a flow, or, how a user takes a picture, right? And it's, someone else who specializes in saying, okay, well, looking to how we'll do this in 5 years, right? Here's the insights that I'm finding. Here's the technology that I'm finding. Here's what could be, right? And here's how we get there today, right? And helping us to say, okay, well, this technology we should use today, and we'll need to have an engineer available to see and talk about feasibility, right? And how soon can we get there, right? A lot of those things sometimes, if you're missing a lot of that cross-functional communication and relationship, sometimes you won't get that, right? You won't get that view of, hey, how will this product look in, 3 years? Or you may design it with all these bells and whistles, and you'll get to the end of the project and end to the vision of what you innovated on. And then someone will come in from the business and be like, hey, we can't do any of this, right? Because we don't have the technology to do so. We don't have the ability to do this, right? And this may take a little longer, if that makes sense.
Through my head, because I've also worked at like large companies that I would say are good at innovation and who value innovation, but a lot of times, to me, innovation is one of those things that's kind of a privilege to have. If you're a big enough organization, you can put some money aside to really think about the future.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of smaller companies are very much focused in the now, because it's about generating, the profit up front to then fuel the innovation on the back end. So I guess one of the things going through my head is, what does a successful innovation organization look like? And you kind of already touched on that, but explicitly, what does that look like to you? And then how does that scale, for different size organizations, for folks that maybe are coming from a larger corporation, like where we've worked, versus a smaller organization that maybe doesn't have innovation laid out as its own?
Sure. I like to think, it's funny because just talking to, peers in the business and like talking about their companies and how they invest in innovation, one of the toughest, aspects of innovation is very much so investment, right? And buy-in from leadership, right? Just because you have a cool idea doesn't mean everybody's willing to do it, right? And doesn't mean everybody's going to waste the time to say, hey, let's apply resources to it, right? A lot of times you have to have something that ties back to the business goals, right? The company's strategy on why they are going down a certain road and how it's going to, benefit the customer, right? But also benefit the business as well, right? And so, what I've seen is when people make a really good case using research, using some sort of form of data to support, right, going on an endeavor, or at least pursuing it, and they're able to validate along the way with research and data, it's usually a lot easier for people to open their pockets to say, hey, we can apply resources to this, or this is worth going down this path, right? Versus people saying, oh, no, that we're just not interested in doing that. That's not what we do, or we're not going to go there.
Yeah. We did talk about that a little bit when we connected a few weeks ago, that a lot of times the folks that are in the decision-making seat are very data-driven. So being a good partner and a good champion of innovation, it looks like being able to quantify the upside. Like what is the investment? What does it take? What are the resources? And then what is the payout if we do it right?
Absolutely, because most organizations, or a lot of organizations sometimes unknowingly, are very output focused, right? They have a lot of deadlines. They're trying to meet certain market demands, and so they're trying to get things out the door, right? And that's just kind of just where we're at, right? I think as design matures, we are moving away from that to a point where we are becoming a lot more outcome focused, right? Where the conversations at the table, whether it be at a ground level, right, of just designers, our leadership level is, okay, what is the outcome we are trying to achieve, right? And at the end of the day, how do we quantify that, right? And how do we turn assumptions that we may have of what's going on in the market, what's going on with our customers, how do we turn that into a hypothesis that we can actually test and validate, but also kind of reaffirm the decision making that we're doing, right? If we have a particular product that we want to innovate on, right? How do we speak to our customers along the way to say, hey, this is the feature or product we're building you, right? Is this the right decision? Is this the need that you have? And how do we get data from that that will help us to keep us on the North Star to say, yes, this is the right thing that we should be building or designing, right?
Yeah, and to that point, when you're bringing that story together for internal stakeholders or decision makers, how do you leverage internal versus external resources to, again, kind of bring all the right pieces together to tell the story?
Yeah, I mean, it's super important to collaborate, right? And really be great partners, right? Because a lot of times a designer is so fixated on creating an amazing user experience, design being top notch, best in class. But a lot of times we need partners in crime, so to speak, to kind of help push that effort forward. So we need product who has a closer view of the business and the business need and the ties to the customer to help kind of with not only seeing our vision of the design, but also championing it in their org, right, with their leadership. The same thing with engineering, right? It's getting them involved in the design process, the implementation process, the process of testing, right? That's another aspect, so that they can champion, right, the effort in their org as well. Because a lot of times you'll see in the past that teams will just be operating in these separate silos. To me, I think we all should be moving as one unit. Even when it comes to testing, right, you want your partners involved in that process to see the customers, to see, hey, this is what they are saying about the product or feature you're designing, and everyone to have the same product IQ, so understanding of what's being designed, but also two, the shared understanding of the customer as well, right? That's super important as well.
Okay, cool. I think you cut out for just a second. I'm not sure if it was me or
I think
you.
I'm getting a little lag a little bit on my side too.
Okay.
Let me see if I can, hold on one second. I think.
Okay, no worries.
Sometimes when your computer gets low, it looks like my battery's a little bit lower than usual.
Okay.
It's kind of trying to crank out on me. There we go. I think we're good. So let's hope that fixes it. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Right.
All right.
So yeah. So I mean, to me, that's been a really critical thing. And there's just so much value when you're bringing those internal, external partners with you along the way. And there's just this effort to say, hey, let's all collectively talk to the customers at the same time.
Yeah.
In product, we want you there. Engineers, we want you there. And we're all in the same room looking at the customer response, right?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect world, leadership is, and it's probably got to be really important efforts, right? But if leadership is seeing the responses of customers as well, it really just puts everyone on the same page to push efforts forward, right? Because then
Absolutely.
it's not design saying, hey, we really think this is a good idea, and it's not subjective. It's not engineers pushing for their effort or product pushing for their effort. It's
Yep.
really this, centered view on what the customer is saying,
Yeah.
and we as a company on how we could best respond to meet their need, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think it totally makes sense. And I've had a very similar experience. I think when you can remove the emotion out of it, again, like
Mhm.
the ego out of it and make it
Yeah,
about the customer,
yeah,
that's when it makes the decision very easy. And so bringing the leadership into the room so they can hear it firsthand is definitely ideal. I know in past experiences I've had, because I've never been in an innovation role, but I've gotten to touch some of the work, and
mhm,
we'll often, record things and extract certain portions of videos or,
yeah,
quotes from the customer to help make the point, that much easier to get behind. So it's not like, oh,
yeah,
Sam thinks this is a great idea. It's like, no, this is what the
exactly,
consumer said. This is straight out of their mouth. And
exactly.
so why wouldn't we move forward with this?
Yeah,
Um, yeah.
yeah. It's funny because, like, during the process of sketching, right, which is a huge part of innovating, right, it should start at the sketching root, right, of just, hey, we're gonna slab out a lot of ideas, right? It's the it could be considered the divergent side of thinking when it comes to solutioning, right? You're just trying to get as many ideas out,
Right.
right, as you go. Let's diverge out. Let's get as many ideas as we can on paper, and then we'll converge on figuring out, which ideas are going to make it to a wireframe or prototype or whatever. But during that process, there's an activity called voting, right, where everyone does all these crazy ideas, and they're formulating and extracting what they feel like we should be designing, and then there's this point where we all kind of merge and have everything on the wall, and we say, hey, let's vote, right, to see what's the best idea, and we'll give people 3 M&Ms or something, right, to actually place or
Yeah.
something. But in thinking about it, customers are kind of like, when they give us the feedback, it's kind of their vote on them saying what they want in our product, right? It's kind of them raising their hand and giving their kind of chime in to say,
Hmm.
hey, I would actually prefer, you guys to do this versus this, right? And so it's kind of including them in that process to innovate, is hearing their voice and actually including that into the product.
Yes, I totally agree. And I feel like everything you're talking about right now is a great transition into um, a topic I wanted to cover, which is what are some
Yeah.
best practices when it comes to innovation? For those folks on the line, whether they're innovators at work now or looking to
Yeah.
bring it to their organization, what are some,
Yeah.
key behaviors or processes that you recommend or that you've had success with?
Yeah, I think, and I've probably become more passionate about this over the years, but I think it's really important to play or to spend a lot of time in the problem space versus the solution space, right? And when I say that, a lot of times people will, and I'll speak for me as a designer, right? Early in my career, you'll just like jump right into design, right? And jump right into like high fidelity, right? And you're just like, I already know what the customer wants. I know what we're trying to solve for, or at least I assume, right? And what I realize is, as I matured in design and matured in my practice, you realize, okay, there's so much that you miss by not validating, right? And so
Yeah.
it's important to spend time in that problem space of doing research, having stakeholder interviews, doing lightning talks, how
Hmm.
might we discussions, right? Doing different exercises to just reassure that you actually know the problem you're solving, and spend the bulk of your time there. And then whatever comes in the solution space will be fed by that,
Right.
right? And so the interfaces we look at, right, we're using Zoom right now, it's a byproduct of how much time the team spent in their problem space and doing their research and collaborating on defining the idea and who they wanted to design for.
Hmm.
And then ultimately, okay, let's do UI at this point. But a lot of what we're seeing and using the product and the great aspects of the experience comes from teams spending a large portion in the problem space. So I'm really passionate about that. And I think too, from an innovation, measuring things,
Yeah.
right? And validating things. I think those both are I think really important. One, validating, right? If you have an assumption on how something should be, figure out a way to test it, to validate it with a real person who actually uses the product, so that you're not thinking so far of blue sky or so innovative that you lose track of why you're actually designing this for someone. And then you're able to create a way to measure success of innovation. So it's not just this thing that goes on a shelf and no one develops it or designs it, or leadership doesn't commit to it because they're just like, yeah, that's a really cool bells and whistle thing, but like, how does that tie back to like the business, and how is it tied back to the strategic efforts of the company? And so I think it's important to do those constantly in an innovation, project, but just in an organization in general, right? Is always, try to do those things.
Right. So if I were to kind of summarize what you've said, I think number one, staying focused on the problem and really understanding that, digging deep, doing your research, asking a lot of questions without jumping so quick to the solution.
Yep.
That way, when you get to that point, you're set up for success.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then finding ways to measure and to check back in and make sure that again, what you're bringing to the solution actually works for the people you're trying to solve it for.
That's right.
And then one of the things that we had discussed was this idea of fail fast mentality.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, excuse me. It's just really important, right? Part of the pathway to, ideating, creating ideas, right, is along the way, you will get things wrong, right? You will, fail, so to speak, right? Part of like mitigating that, right, is very much so doing your checks and balances in the problem space. But failing in a lot of ways helps to potentially bring exponential value down the road, right? Because if you fail at something, and say you're designing an application and you're designing a feature for that application, and it turns out what you designed was a complete bomb with the customer. They're like, I hate this. This is terrible. Like, what is this? What went wrong? But then you use some of that iterative process of design thinking and of design in general to circle back to validate, right? And try to measure what went wrong and validate what was missed, and then redesign it and go back. Usually the learnings from that, right, can help to bring so much value down the road, right? And so it makes that failing worth, failing, right? And you can get something from it.
Right. And I think to your earlier point, when you are working low fidelity up front and failing quickly with that, it's a lesser investment than if you're trying to make something look perfect and look to hand off to, a customer to test. A lot less went into it, right? So failing up front and early on isn't that big of a deal because not a lot has been invested.
Yes, it's a very, very good point, right? One of the sweet spots of, really staying low fidelity, right, is failure is, how should I say, it doesn't have as much as weight when you fail and you've spent less time and less effort and resources, right? Especially from a design perspective. When you design a product, and then you actually develop it and ship it, right? And you fail, at that point, you've had so much resource investment, right, into that when you fail, once it's in the market, it's like a lot of money is lost, versus if right on the onset of low fidelity design, you're meeting with engineers, you're meeting with product, you're meeting with those external stakeholders to try and solve and fail fast, then it's so much cheaper. You have not yet had a lot of resources invested into it. There's time not invested into it. And so, to your point, you want to try and fail as early as possible and test as early as possible.
Yeah, and I've just been kind of skimming the chat as we've been
Yeah,
talking, and one of the
sure.
questions Amy had put, like, how do you get executive leadership on board with inherent risks involved with these failures? And I think that's how you do it, is
Yeah,
it's little investment up front. So it's not, I mean, it's not really a failure,
yeah,
it's a learning experience, and we
yeah,
didn't invest that much. We actually got all of these insights out of it. So it
yeah,
kind of pays for itself in that way.
yeah.
Um, One of the other things I
Absolutely.
wanted to comment on, because there were some questions around, how innovation with, because a lot of what you're talking about are like digital products.
Yep,
And for folks on the call, like my experience has all been in the consumer packaged goods industry.
absolutely,
So it's more
absolutely.
packaging and shelf sets and
Yep,
things like that. And it's the same stuff. So, if Mario is talking about wireframes in a
yep,
digital context and, an app on your phone, I'm talking about, a very rough prototype of what a package or a product could be, so people can
that's
hold
right.
it in their hand and kind of
That's
interact
right.
with it. And it can be pipe cleaners and modeling clay. It doesn't have to be,
Absolutely.
a finished product. So those things, like these principles that we are talking about today, really transcend the, the substrate, I guess you could say.
No, absolutely. I mean, if I were to if I were designing a chair, right? And at one day, at some point, I want it into, a retail store that I want to sell, right? And I want to prototype and test it. I'm going to buy really cheap early on, right? The materials I use to build the prototype for that chair, I'm going to see, of course, what's durable and what works, but I'm just going to buy really cheap. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of money, right, to kind of put this product together that I know has not thoroughly been tested, right? There may be some of the specs that I want to match, like perhaps the weight it can hold. I want to buy cheap material, right, that will have the same kind of threshold for weight, that if someone X amount of weight can sit on it, I want it to hold. But from a financial standpoint, I just want to buy cheap materials enough to where it gets the point across. And I want to test that one product with as many as people as I can. And then once I can validate the feedback and what I'm getting from that, at that point, it's like, okay, great, right? I've not invested a substantial amount of money into this project. And now I can actually, knowing that I've, validated all the assumptions, now I can actually build what I really want, make it fancy and pretty and all that good stuff, right?
Right. Cool. We've got about 10 minutes left, and
Sure.
we've covered a lot of what I wanted to. So thank you so
Awesome. Yeah,
much.
no problem.
I want to skim the chat and our Q&A. I
Sure.
don't know, Matt, if you're keeping tabs on it. But folks, any questions you have, please share them, because we want to be able to, leverage Mario's expertise here while we have him.
Awesome.
One of the questions we have in the Q&A, Mario, for you, is
Great.
there a favorite project that you can share with us? What made it memorable?
Um, There was a design system project that I did early in my career for Home Depot, and it was really memorable in many different ways. One, the sheer scope of it at the time. The team that I was on, we were trying to come up with new standards in ways that customers would navigate not only the homepage for Home Depot, but also some of the category pages, which are like primary pages customers visited and traveled on, and actually segue through to like buy their products. And the project was just really fun because we took so much of approach of, hey, let's just do this as if we were kids, right? Let's take things apart. Let's throw things on the wall. Let's dissect what this needs to be. Let's study people, and then let's create something really good, right? And so that's kind of one of my most memorable ones. There's a couple of banking ones that were really cool as well, that I've had an opportunity to help with kind of redesigning some of our products in early stages. And so those are really cool, right? To just be, in the room where something that has never been created is being created, and you have to spend the time just to, understand the problem at a really deep level, right? And then, create something new.
Awesome. There's a question, kind of, I think, similar to where you were starting to go. What's been one of your most proudest moments recently? I think especially because the intersection of banking and design doesn't always feel connected, when you put those
Yeah.
two terms side by side. Is there
Yeah.
anything that you're proud of lately that you can share with the group?
I think just some of the cross-functional partners that I work with. Historically, there's this tension, and I'm not sure if this is for everybody, but I've seen it, that there's this tension between the triage of design, product, and engineering, right? And there's these fights that happen between product and design where they're bickering and they're fighting and they're bumping heads. And so over the last couple of years, I've had some really good product partners who get it, right? They may not be designers, but they're well informed on where design is going, and they're in tune where design should be, and they're collaborative and they're inclusive. And so to me, that is the sweet spot of doing what we do, is when you have good partners, right? That makes everything work, because naturally people who design are going to be talented, but when you have great partners with you, and along with you along the way, and they're advocating with you, that is the sweet spot, undeniably. And so that I would probably say is definitely my most memorable thing, is some of the really good cross-functional partners I've built, and our collaboration has just been great.
Awesome. Yeah, that's been my experience too. When you've got good partners and you all are working in the same direction, that's when magic happens.
It does, truly.
In the context of UX, can you talk a little bit about how you design with accessibility in mind? And then any advice you have for how designers can, learn these types of principles and apply them to the work that they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from an academician standpoint, right, there's a bunch of really good websites obviously out there. A lot of great books that are written. I'm a book nerd, and so I love diving into a good book about it. But I definitely encourage anyone to really dive into some of the reading material out there that's on it. Truist does an amazing job with accessibility, and we've got a really good team of people very talented in this space who do this very well. As it relates to process, right, and specifics around that, I honestly like to pull in accessibility partners as early as possible. As soon as I have a design component or an aspect of design fleshed out enough where I can review it with an accessibility partner, I like doing it, right? Because they can pick it apart right away. And because they're so knowledgeable on the latest accessibility related standards, catching it early is great, because it's not much effort. It's still in that low fidelity phase, and you can still convey your idea of, hey, I would like this drop down to happen. Or, if I had like this calculator, keyboard come up here and it's on the screen, like how would the screen reader read it, right? Like all those nuanced questions that you may have around accessibility, it's good to loop them in early so that they can view it. And then once they do, they can tell you your feedback, and you can go and iterate and go from there. But I would say bring them in like any other partner really early.
Yeah.
And that usually helps with moving things forward. And then from, growing your knowledge in it, right? Obviously dealing with experts who are really good at it, but just, picking up some books that really touch on it is the easiest way. It's a really technical field, and aside from experiencing, reading is another way to really help with that.
Yeah, I've dabbled a little bit, and I would just say too that it's constantly changing. So to your
Yes,
point, if you have a subject matter expert, somebody who is continually working to build that knowledge, have them in your corner. But
that's
there's
right.
you can find all kinds of resources online, and so staying up to date and
That's right.
reading, those are the best ways to do it. Totally,
That's
totally
right.
agree with you.
That's right.
Um, Cool. So we've got just a couple more minutes. I think I'm going to end with this last one
Okay.
from Javier. A very wise man once said to me, nobody ever innovated by following a best practice. And you mentioned innovation requires data, consumer research, etc. However, the opposite side of that is the assumption. Sorry, lost my place. Is the assumption around a best practice when it comes to a big shiny object. What's your strategy for deterring stakeholders from chasing those types of innovations?
Yeah. So I think if anything, it's just, I'll say this, hopefully it conveys discernment is really important, right? Being able to look at a given situation, process our effort, and being able to know how we should pivot, right? Because a lot of people, they do say, to your point, Javier, this is the best practice, this is the best way to do it. But it's showing them a different way by understanding kind of where they think they were going with it, but showing them perhaps a better approach that can be measured, right? Because that's what it comes down to. People as much as possible have to remove the subjectivity out of design, because that's where people really fall, is they get so wrapped up on their opinions and their processes and their approach that it becomes subjective. And so you have to be able to say, okay, hey, I get it, right? This is the approach that you want to take, and you want to build this big shiny thing, but right, here's perhaps the approach that you can take, and here are ways you can validate that this would be true, right? And that usually could help with preventing and or helping when those scenarios come up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like always bring it back to consumer helps too, right?
Right.
Because it removes you
Right.
from it. I was in a
That's
meeting
right.
the other day and folks were like, we have to do X, Y, and Z, da, da, da. And I was like, who's asking for this?
That's
And
right.
they're like,
You gotta ask
oh,
the
the
questions.
general manager over here wants it. And I was like, is
Yeah.
anybody having issues with, like, are any of our customers having issues?
That's right.
Because if
Yep.
they're not,
It's not really a big
it
problem.
might not actually be a problem.
It's true. And that happens most of the time, is they'll say it's this massive problem.
Right.
And once you spend time in the problem space and dissect it and say, hey, what is actually going on? Like, what are we looking at? You'll find that sometimes it just doesn't point back to people and the customer, and it's just somebody subjectively saying it's a problem, and it may not really be. So.
Right on. Awesome. Well, we're right at time to wrap it up. Mario, favorite carry out spot in Atlanta to get like a Friday night dinner?
I've been really digging like Korean barbecue. That's like been my spot. And so Heirloom is like, I don't know how many people, but
good choice.
It's a great place to go. I love their food. It's awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Have a great Labor Day weekend, and we'll see you next month.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.